Team up, dream up. For girls, finding your team is game-changing, which is why Metrobank are championing the growth of women's and girls cricket across England and Wales. Their mission is to create a brighter future for girls through cricket in partnership with the ECB. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. Two main items on the agenda today. In part one, we have an interview with a player who will potentially be a pivotal part of the Edwards era. And in part two, we will look at the thorny issue of player safety, particularly around the occasionally brutal and relentless schedule that the players endure during the Blast. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Katya Witney. In part one, you'll hear from Linsey Smith, and in part two, you'll hear from Lauren Winfield-Hill. Katya, you spoke to Linsey Smith earlier today. She played in 5 of the 6 games against West Indies, having been an at best peripheral figure in the Lewis and Kitely eras. But something that we potentially underplayed before the West Indies series was just how far she goes back with Charlotte Edwards, the New England coach.
Yeah, this is completely on me, but I hadn't clocked that Linsey Smith has turned 30. I didn't clock that she'd been around for that long. I assumed she was more in kind of like almost the Emma Luck mould of someone who was in their late 20s and coming back into the England setup. But she played, as you heard in the interview, she played under Charlotte Edwards' captaincy at the Vipers in 2016-17 before leaving and going to Northern Diamonds, and then rejoined Vipers at the end of the 2022 season. And in that 2022 season, she was the leading wicket taker, I believe, in the Rachel Hare Flint Trophy. And that relationship with Edwards, I think, is something that's been almost the most pivotal point of her career, because it was Edwards who then, so she played in the BBL a few years before, but then Edwards brought her in for Sixers in the 2023-4 or 2-3 winter, around that time. And that was the point she came back on England's radar. So she came in for that series in New Zealand where there was problems with WPL player availability. Sophie Eccleston wasn't available for the 2 matches that Smith played due to her WPL commitments. Did well in that series and then played 2 matches under John Lewis in that summer in the return series against New Zealand. And that was her way back in. So it almost felt like behind the scenes there was that relationship and work with Charlotte Edwards that drew her back into that kind of all-conquering Vipers side, where a load of the England players who came back or made their debuts during the kind of 21-2 era came from. And now with Charlotte Edwards, she's brought her right into the centre of that England fold now across both formats. So it feels like that's kind of almost a defining relationship of her career, and someone who's been central both to her development and now to her kind of ascendancy.
The other thing I found interesting is the predicament that she was in early in her career, as you say, she's 30 now, in not having an England contract in the days before there were even regional contracts. So if you go back to 2018, when she first played for England, is in an England World Cup squad, if you didn't have a contract with England back then, that was basically it. And she was in exactly that position with a full-time job.
Yeah, so you will have heard her say that she was coaching, I think she said at Leicestershire full-time during that era. And it seems kind of mad to me that I know that, like, we know professionalism isn't that much of an old concept in English women's cricket, but it feels like we almost take it for granted now that, and Linsey Smith was playing in that 2018 T20 World Cup, and then suddenly she wasn't even a professional anymore. And I think it says something more about that time, that the only way to play professional cricket as a female player in England was by playing for England. And when you came into that setup, you were coming into a professional setup, having never been a professional before. And that's not an environment that sets you up to succeed. That environment felt like such a closed environment to get into that core. You weren't just getting into the core of the playing, you were getting into actually being paid a salary. And I think you can draw parallels with her career and Alice Davidson-Richards. They're pretty much the same age. They came into England at a similar time and then were both dropped and awarded those rookie contracts on the first kind of expansion of professional contracts in 2019 that I don't have exactly what the salaries were, but I think you can bet they weren't that high. And then the next year when they expanded the regional contracts, they were both given them and still not paid that much money to play professional cricket.
We're talking sums of money that it's very hard to actually make a living off.
Yeah, exactly. Around the kind of £18,000 mark is what was reported per year at the time. And I think it speaks to a very particular experience of players their age in their mid-20s who weren't, say, at uni and on a student loan kind of point at their careers, as a lot of those players were. If you look at the other players who were coming in during that time, Alice Davidson-Richards and Linsey Smith were the oldest ones. You had Sophia Dunkley, who came in at that time, who was younger, Maddie Villiers, those kinds of players, but they were a few years younger. And those are the players who were able to establish themselves in that kind of core part of England going forwards. Whereas for those players in their mid-20s trying to make a living and trying to be independent, it feels just like a constant struggle for them. It's something we can also, and we have said about Paige Schofield, although she wasn't picked for England at that time. But I do wonder, these players are now coming back into the setup having really grafted over those few years. So Edwards has brought Smith back, she's brought ADR back, she's brought Paige Schofield back in to an extent. Marlott as well is another player we can talk about with that. But I do wonder how many players who could have had really, really good England careers that we've lost during that whole process. And I think it would be interesting to look at some of those players who were featuring around that point and now are not playing professional cricket.
No, absolutely. Anyway, here is that chat with Linsey Smith.
Joining us on the show this week, we have Linsey Smith. He played a starring role in England's double white ball series wins over the West Indies. Linsey, you had a brilliant series. You took 5 wickets on ODI debut and played a big role in the T20 series. That must have been incredibly satisfying after such a long time on the periphery.
Yeah, it was amazing. I think, looking back now, it still feels a bit surreal, but most importantly, it was a great series for us, obviously, to bounce back and win every game was really important for us. And to be able to contribute was really nice.
You were involved over the winter as well. New coach came in at the start of the season. We've talked about a lot. You've worked with Charlotte Edwards quite a lot over the course of your career. What role did you expect to play in the side at the beginning of the summer?
Well, yeah, like you say, I've worked with Lottie for quite a few years now and played with her as well. So I like to think she knows me pretty well. But yeah, her messaging to me has been pretty, I guess, similar to what I've done in county level. Just, do what I do well and encourage me to do that. And her role clarity is really clear with me. Obviously, I've done a lot of power play bowling in T20s, and I don't think that changes too much with how I bowl. But yeah, she's been great for the group and really like pushing us to get better. So that's been good, and hopefully it can carry on.
I want to get more into the specifics of the West Indies series a little bit later on, but just to go back a little bit on the start of your international career, you first came into the international scene in 2018 for a T20 World Cup that year in the Caribbean. You played 2 games in that tournament and a couple of series in Asia in 2019. You took 13 wickets at 14s across 9 games in your first initial spell in the side. You were then dropped for a few years after that. That must have been quite tough to take, given that it wasn't a performance issue.
Yeah, it was tough to take, but I think looking back at that time and when I actually came away from that England setup, I was almost a bit embarrassed that I'd played for England. I've spoken about it a bit before, but yeah, I didn't really feel like I was quite ready or had as much exposure as what I needed. So I look back at that time and I definitely wasn't the best bowler I could have been and had a lot more to develop and get better at. So yeah, for me, it was probably the best thing to get away from that setup. Obviously, it wasn't my choice and it was really tough to take at that time because, when you're young, all you want to do is play for England and give it your best shot. And I felt like I hadn't really given it my best shot. And yeah, coming out of that was really hard. I was at a place where I wasn't enjoying my cricket very much. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself and it got a bit unhealthy at times. So when I did step back, I kind of thought to myself, right, am I going to carry on through this and not enjoy it? Or, shall I give it up? Should I do something else? Or actually, do I just go back to being that kid that loves playing with her mates? And when I'm having fun and when I'm competitive with other people, then that brings the best out in me. So thankfully I took that option and went back to play obviously regional stuff and just said to myself, look, enjoy it, like don't put pressure on yourself because that doesn't help me at all. So I guess I did that successfully over a number of years for county, and then coming back into the England setup a few years ago was like a bit of a breath of fresh air, really.
It's interesting hearing you say that about your first stint with England, because we had Arlott on the show a few weeks ago just before the series who spoke of a similar experience coming in around the same time as your first stint. Do you think that feeling of not feeling quite ready for international cricket was a common experience among players who came in who weren't perhaps in that core group of players at that time?
Yeah, I think naturally back then it probably was because, you know, we didn't have the volume of cricket that we have now and the exposure. Obviously, I'd played in the Big Bash as well, in that stuff as well. So I think back then probably we didn't have much exposure, but now obviously the amount of games we're playing and all across the world, I think really helps you then settle into that environment.
And coming at it from a purely spin perspective and you talking about that volume of games, I guess especially as a spinner to have that confidence in what you're sending down, you need to play a volume of cricket before coming into the international setup. And if we look at the spinners England have got, even beyond the likes of Sophie Ecclestone, Charlie Dean and Sarah Glenn, but back towards the time you first came into the setup, people like Alex Hartley, Laura Marsh, Kirsty Gordon, Maddie Villiers. How tough is it as a young spinner coming through on the domestic circuit to make that jump up to international level when there's such a plethora of great spinners?
Yeah, it's tough. Like you say, there's so many good spinners around now. But yeah, I think like Lottie's messaging has been, if you're performing well in county cricket, then you are going to get recognised and you are going to put your hand up. So for me, it's probably not looking too far ahead about who's ahead of me or what's to come and where I want to get to. It's more focusing on what I do well and controlling what's in front of me in that game at that certain time, and then hoping that the performances can add up and put my hand up.
And just still on that time where you first came in, when you came out of that setup, domestic contracts were just starting to come in. You were put on a rookie contract in 2019. And then when that number was increased to 41, you were on a professional contract in that first year of them. From an outside point of view at that time, it felt like if you weren't contracted with England by your mid-20s or you weren't in uni, it was quite hard to keep going. Did you ever fear that you might, I mean, you spoke a little bit about that, did you throw the towel in, but was that ever a consideration for you that your career might have to be put on hold?
Yeah, massively. I think at that time I spoke about, I'd come out of uni and I'd got a full-time job coaching with Leicestershire. And then obviously I wasn't on a full-time cricket contract, so I had to fit my training in around that and kind of work out what priorities and where they sat with me. And yeah, that was probably breaking point because I was coaching cricket every day, I was working in cricket, and then I also had my cricket to focus on, and it just got so overwhelming for me. I think, you know, you still need to be able to live and you need a job to get by because you can't just train all day and not have any income. So yeah, for me that was a real kind of breaking point and tough point, and I actually ended up giving up that full-time job, and I just went back to part-time and thought, you know what, I'm just going to give cricket a real hot shot here and see where I can get.
That must have been quite a tough decision financially to make at that time.
Yeah, massively. You know, you need money to live, right? And but for me, I don't regret it. I think it was the best choice for me looking back at that time. You know, it was all too much and something had to give. And for me, I knew deep down I'd kick myself if I gave up my cricket career for coaching. I wasn't ready for that at all. So yeah, I still had that passion to play cricket for England again. So yeah, I'm looking back, it was probably the best decision.
And then looking at your domestic returns across the early 2020s, if you like, the 2021, 2022, you were the leading wicket taker in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy. In 2022, did well in the 100. You went and played the Big Bash and another couple of franchise leagues as well. What was the changing point for you in terms of that trajectory?
I think just enjoying it all again and, you know, not looking too far ahead or putting pressure on myself to do certain things and get certain figures in a game. Like for me, it was just about going out there, having fun with my friends and trusting what I do well. And if, you know, you in a T20 game, you bowl 4 overs, right? And it's very rare that every single ball you bowl is going to be perfect. And for me in my early England career, if I bowled one bad ball that didn't feel right or went for a boundary, that would really derail me. But I guess it was having that recognition of, okay, do you know what? It is T20, it's a hard game and not every ball's going to be perfect. So I guess, yeah, taking that weight off and relaxing a bit more and yeah, just enjoying what I was doing was really helpful for me.
And how are you a different bowler now compared to your first stint in the side?
I think I've got a lot more awareness around tactics and what my role can be, and I guess my consistency is probably the one thing that helps me do well, I guess. But yeah, for me, it wasn't changing too much technically. I think the most growth I've had is probably me as a person and in my mindset around games and how I approach them and in the game as well. So, but yeah, I'm very competitive, very fiery. So yeah, I'll definitely give it my best shot.
And you spoke at the beginning a bit about bowling in different phases of the game. When do you think you're most dangerous as a bowler?
I think, yeah, probably power play is probably my best threat at the minute. Obviously, I'm not your traditional spinner that will bowl through the middle and get a bit of bounce and turn. I tend to skid them in and occasionally get a bit of swing. So, yeah, for me, power play, I guess, helps me really switch on and focus because obviously, yeah, there's only two out. If you miss, then, your margin for error at times is really small. So, I think that's what helps me get going. And then, yeah, I mean, I like bowling any phase, to be honest. I just like having the ball in my hand.
What are you looking to do in that power play? How are you looking to take your wickets?
I think just, not give the batter any sort of room or any sort of arms. Just for me, if I can, focus on bowling at the stumps every ball, obviously that will change with different plans to different people. But I think my main threat is obviously keeping the stumps in play and hoping that they make a mistake.
And you talked about being that kind of skiddy kind of bowler. I think naturally as a left arm spinner, you're going to get compared to Sophie Eccleston because she's dominated the left arm spin role for so long. But being different bowlers, obviously Sophie is much taller, spins the ball a lot more, comes from a different angle. There's definitely a role you two can play in the same side, right?
100%, yeah. And I've said that before, I think Soph's obviously a world-class bowler and she's performed so well for so long. But although that we bowl with the same arm, I think we're very different bowlers still and obviously can bowl in different phases. But, in saying that, we've also got Charlie Dean and Sarah Glenn, who are also, world-class bowlers. So I think the competition for places with the spinners is really healthy and, we're all pushing each other. So, but yeah, I don't see why me and Soph can't play in the same team.
And how does you've only just made your ODI debut, but how do you see your role as different in the 50 over form of the game?
Yeah, I don't think it changes too much. Obviously, I've only played 2 games so far, and I'd like to think they went pretty well for me. So, but yeah, for me again, especially I think with the World Cup coming up in India, if as much as I can target the stumps and hope that the batters, make a mistake or put pressure on one end, then yeah, I think my role won't change too much.
And we spoke about bowling in the power play, but in the ODIs, you came on in the 23rd over, the 12th over, you also bowled a little bit towards the end. How do your plans change through different phases of the innings? How are you bowling differently at the end of the innings compared to the power play at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it probably depends on the given situations that we're in. Obviously, if we've got a batter who's in and who's going, then it's probably about trying to get them off strike and actually having the 4 out. Whereas, we saw in the West Indies series when we were on top and when we could put pressure on, then we held back putting those 4 out and actually just tried to create a bit more pressure and hope that they made mistakes. And yeah, I think obviously it depends on different situations that we're in, but to have that flexibility and I guess, to have different plans up our sleeves is really good going forward.
I guess against the West Indies as well, specifically, that would depend on whether Hayley Matthews was still batting or not.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we saw that in the very first game at the T20s when she got 100. I think, we navigated that pretty well. Obviously, she's a very world-class player. And of course, there's times where you want to get her out and put pressure on her. But again, reading that situation, it was about, okay, well, how can we bowl at the other end and put pressure on them? And then hopefully then that affects Hayley and she has to go at some point.
Just moving on slightly, we mentioned her at the start, but I wanted to ask you briefly about the role that Charlotte Edwards has played in your career. You played for Southern Vipers when she would have been playing. You mentioned playing with her 2016, 17. Then you went up north to the Diamonds before rejoining Vipers at the end of 2022. Played for Sydney Sixers 2023, 2024, the team Edwards coaches. And now she's brought you into the centre of the fold in her England side. What's your relationship with her been like over the years?
Yeah, it's been great. I think, obviously, yeah, grew up playing with her and knew how fiery and competitive she was. And I think, we're very similar in that sense that, we're both very passionate and competitive people. But I think, yeah, in a coaching manner, she's, extremely supportive. I think she's, she treats you as a person more than a cricketer at times. And sometimes that's what you need. But yeah, for me, she's been great. Again, like obviously having that exposure in different teams and playing around the world with her as well has been great. But for me, she's just been fully supportive and also very clear of what she demands and what she expects and I guess the tactics around the game. And that's been really massive for my development.
Do you think she brings out the best in you as a coach?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think so. Obviously, it's early days in the England fold, but she's the perfect person to lead this team. Obviously, we had a tough winter, and looking back, there were times where we probably could have played a lot better. And she's been clear at that. But also, she's told us, we are a good team, and we don't just lose that overnight. But it's about hard work, and it's about taking each game as it comes and being a bit smarter in I guess certain game situations that we face, and yeah, just really, I guess, encouraging us to show our best.
And looking ahead, should say that the England squad for India, which is the series coming up in a few weeks' time, hasn't been named yet. But assuming that you'll play a role in that series, that's a bigger challenge, right? A lot of the India batters are very good at playing spin. How does your plan change when you're bowling to a Smriti Mandana or Jemima Rodriguez compared to the West Indies?
Yeah, obviously it's very exciting, and it's going to be a tough challenge, but I think it's one that we want now, and one that I feel that as a group we're ready for. We want to put in some really good performances against a really strong India team. We've had big series against them before that are pretty competitive and fiery. So for us, yeah, again, it's about taking each game as it comes, and I guess in certain match situations that we come up against, just being a bit smarter and being a bit clearer. But yeah, we're really excited. Obviously, it's going to be a big challenge and it's a big series, but again, hopefully that can put us in good stead for the World Cup.
And just lastly on that World Cup, it's pretty perfect timing for you that there's a World Cup in India coming up in a few months' time. You must see that as a big opportunity.
Yeah, I mean it's exciting, but I think like I said before, there's 4 or 5 world-class spinners that are trying to push their spot. So yeah, it's very exciting. But again, I think all focus now is on India, and obviously that's what's next to come. So for us, it's about putting in some more good performances and helping each other get better and grow, and hopefully win that series.
Perfect. Well, good luck in that series, Linsey, and cheers for your time today.
No worries, thank you.
Next up in part 2, player safety. The women's schedule in the Blast is essentially as relentless as the men's competition, and with it brings similar concerns over player safety and welfare. Here's Lauren on that, but also the last week or so of action in the Blast. So the schedule, we know it's relentless in the men's competition, and this is the first year of the women's Blast, and it looks similarly relentless, not just in terms of how few rest days there are, but also in terms of the travel that's expected of players, something that doesn't necessarily come across when you look at the schedule, because hotel stays overnight are less regular in the county game as it is internationally. Lauren, I'm just going to read out some numbers from the PCA. So the majority of players for 50 over cricket in men's and women's cricket support a minimum 2-day period before games, with 71% of players in the women's game saying that there should be a 2-day gap between each 50 over game. And in the T20 game, it's 82% of players think that there should be at least 1 day between matches. There are lots of occasions where teams are playing back-to-back, 15 occasions, but also lots of occasions where teams have, in theory, a 1-day rest day, but that involves a mammoth journey across the country, because the difference between the men's competition and the women's competition is that the women's competition doesn't have a north and south group, whereas the men's obviously does. Just how relentless can it be when you're playing on a Thursday night and you're playing again somewhere completely different on the Friday?
Yeah, it can be pretty hectic. I think, obviously, travel on, I always say, I'm conditioned to play cricket. I'm not conditioned to sit in a car or on a coach. Like, honestly, on your body, that is way harder than a game of cricket. So there's probably that element as well. Yeah, and I think it's the hotel stay is an interesting one, because I think it's very club dependent and sort of where people want to spend their money. Like, a lot of the times that off the first corner that's cut is like, okay, well, if we can save a few grand by not having to put 20 people up for an extra night, then clearly they're going to do it. Like, in the first game we played against Hampshire away, and it's down south, but it was a 3-hour journey from Hampshire back to Chelmsford after the game. And then you get in and it's 11:30 at night, nearly midnight. You're trying to, just decompress a bit as well, and you're knackered. And you're driving knackered as well. And yeah, it is tough. Like I've already like sort of looked at our schedule from an Essex point of view, and we've got Lancashire away, and then the next day, and I think they wanted that to be a night game initially as well, because they were like, oh, we'll put the women on after the men, like give them a chance to have prime time, which was great in theory. And it was like, hang on a minute, we're going to finish at midnight, and then we're playing the next day at the Oval and an 11 o'clock start. We can't be. So we've actually had to change from the men's, what's usually the men's slot, the 6 p.m. slot, to the 3 o'clock slot. But still, like, you're then playing the next day at 11 o'clock. I feel like that's not as bad if it's a later start as well with the travel. But yeah, it's pretty hectic. You know, like I think fatigue and stuff certainly starts to play its part and rear its head a little bit at halfway through a competition. Especially like you look at teams that are either side of the Midlands. I think the Midlands teams have probably generally come out of this a lot better than a lot of the other teams. But like you look at like a Durham and a Hampshire, like that's a lot of travelling. Or Somerset, you know, that is a lot of mileage. And yeah, probably the parts that like nobody talks about, isn't it? Is like, yeah, it's your job and you're professional cricketers and you get paid to play cricket and all the rest of it. Like we so frequently hear, but like you're tired, like genuinely, you're tired and sore. And like I say, a lot of the time, it's not even from like the games; it's from the travel, and then you know, I sometimes think as well. This might be something that this might be more unique, but I think probably a lot of players will speak for it. It's like the social battery of being on buses all the time as well, like constantly being around all your teammates, and your social battery is absolutely shot. You know, like after a game, you sort of just want to decompress and like just chill out basically, and just the constant travel is very draining.
I mean, so there are a few strands to it. I mean, first one is just a safety thing, because it sounds like there's quite often players are driving long distances late at night, having just played a pretty intense game. That doesn't feel safe. You know, you see adverts all the time about how you shouldn't be driving when you're absolutely knackered. You're asking elite sports people to compete at the highest level, and then when you're finished, say, go on, have a 3-hour drive. That doesn't seem safe.
Yeah, no, it is, and it is like I say, in that you're playing a game where you're trying to concentrate for 3 or 4 hours, and then you got a 3 hour journey, and you're trying to concentrate again on that. It's like, you know, it's pretty relentless, and it is hard to like you say, it's not safe. But it also, like, you can't always have a hotel stay after a game, because depends where you are the next day, or you know, like even the day after that. Like if you've got match day -1 the next day, and you know you're traveling again, it's not always possible. You know, you've got to get to a point. You know, it's not always actually possible to stay after the games, hence the scheduling thing. But yeah, like it's certainly busy. It's certainly congested this year, and like I say, I think probably a great point that you've raised is, and one that I hadn't really even thought about, with the women's game being not north and south, it's countrywide. Like if you're Durham and Somerset, you know, like a lot, to be honest, like the whole team thing, like a big thing was like with Durham for me, it was like, I don't want to be like a Midlands game to be a 4 or 5 hour drive, genuinely.
Yeah.
Like I'm at the back end of my career. I'd like it to last for as long as it can. I don't want 2-3 hours extra on a bus or in a car every game that I play. What I will say is I don't want them to split north and south with the women's thing, because I think that would be crap. But there's, yeah, like I'll just get that in there now.
Yeah.
I just don't think that'll work.
Yeah.
You know, like I just think it needs to be one group and one sort of competition. But yeah, like there's got to be some sort of happy medium in here, hasn't there?
Talk us through the impact on the cricket itself, playing when you're knackered, and also the impact of just being in a coach or a car for so long when there's such a short gap between games. I know obviously so much more thought and time is given to player recovery, and this feels like a not hugely. It doesn't feel that this fits in with that more health conscious approach.
Yeah, well, I dropped an absolute clanger yesterday, and it cost us 100 runs. So I was just going to say, look, I'm tired. I've been travelling. I'm sorry. I owe you all 100 runs. Nah, in all seriousness, it's hard to concentrate. It's hard to do your job. It's hard to your body feels more tired. Like the only way I can describe it is like, when you're not fatigued, you warm up and you're springy, like you feel up for it. You feel like you can see everything, like you're very aware of everything. Your body feels light, and when you're fatigued, your body feels heavy. You warm up and you do your first few sort of sprints, and you just like it's like trying to shift it with a trailer attached. Concentration wise and stuff, I think you're just not sharp. Like I always think, and this is not yesterday. I dropped a clanger. This has got nothing to do with it. But like when I'm fatigued, I feel like I'm watching like an area of the ball.
Yeah.
So I can see the ball for sure, but I'm watching like a space around the ball. When I'm not fatigued, I can see the seam. That's probably the best way to describe it. Is like it's just everything is sharper. To somebody maybe who doesn't play cricket or can't necessarily relate to that analogy, is like things are just sharper and in colour. When you're not fatigued, and then when you're fatigued, everything's just a bit more murky and blurry, I would say. But like I always think, like I watch the ball when I'm not fatigued. Like I can watch the ball, I can see the seam, like I'm properly dialed in. And when I sort of feel like I'm tired and fatigued, it's like, yeah, it's sort of there. There's this white circular thing coming down at me, but it's just not razor sharp.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it does sound quite a lot like what a lot of clubbies will feel like playing pretty hungover on Saturday, Sunday.
Is that because you've had 20 pints the night before?
Well, maybe not 20. My friend and colleague Cameron Ponsonby has a strict 4-pint rule, and that feels pretty sensible.
And then it's a bit murky. It's not. You can't see the seam.
Yeah. Do you think there should be a minimum standard of gaps between games? Because just from a competition integrity point of view, it seems mad that Lancashire have, I think, 4 of the 15 occasions where teams are playing back-to-back games.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I won't often stick up for Lancashire, but I am going to in this scenario. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, it's got to be fair, hasn't it? Like anything's got to be fair. Like that would be like saying, all right, you guys are going to play, you're going to get more home games and they're going to get more away games. Like it just wouldn't happen, would it? Like you've got an equal amount of home and away games. That's how it works. It sort of feels like the double header scenario needs to be factored in the same as it would a home and away, and giving it a real fair, just making it a fair playing field, because 100% it comes into it. The first few rounds, might not necessarily feel like it plays a huge part, but like, let me tell you, like halfway through a comp, it makes a difference big time, and especially at the business end of the comp, it makes a huge difference. So, it's certainly something that needs to be done. I always think as well, like, what's the elite of the elite, like sports globally, like what would they do? Do you know what I mean? Like, what would Premiership football team do? What would the NBA do? Like, I can't imagine them making people travel after a game or backup games. Or I know, like, sport has evolved a lot generally, hasn't it? And it's very packed. Like, I feel like the whole scheduling thing is like, you have that with the Champions League in football, and then there's loads of Premiership games, and then the NBA schedule. Like, I know we're going a bit like left field here, but I think all of sport has got greedy in terms of they just want it on every night of the week, which is fair, but there has to be some sort of balance to it. Definitely in terms of the player welfare part of it, like in terms of the hotel stays and where money's spent, like I can fully understand the club being like, look, if we can save a few grand, then of course you would. But really, what's the trade-off and what's the compromise of, all right, well, halfway through a comp, you might have 2 players down to injury because they're flogged and they haven't slept well for, 3 weeks now or whatever. So I think there's always there's always upsides to playing more games, and I'm much preferring playing more games. I'd rather play than train, but it has to be, you have to strike that balance.
I mean, footballers complain when they play a game every 3 or 4 days, and they're only playing for 90 minutes. So I don't know what they're complaining about.
Yeah, but we just walk around and drink tea and eat scones, don't we? So we're not as. But it's players want to play, of course they do, but it has to be what you want to do is players want to play, but they want to play at their best every time. That's the thing, is you want to play, you want to be up for it, you want to feel like you can go all in every game and you're present, and sometimes you're just not, because you're tired and you're human.
You already mentioned the game yesterday against Hampshire. I know you've talked about her before, but I just wanted to hear more from you on Ellen McCacken. Scored 100 on the TV yesterday, first one in the Blast. Having seen her up in close quarters, what do you think? She's a leading run scorer in the Blast, 5th leading run scorer in the One Day Cup, just 22 years old, hasn't played much in the 100. What did she do well? How excited should we be?
Oh, I've rated Ella Mac for a few years. I feel like she should have left Hampshire a few years ago when she was good enough. 2 or 3 years ago, she was absolutely good enough. She'd come in, she'd score runs, and then England players would come back and she'd get chucked to the back of the apple cart. But she's been good enough for a couple of years, I think. She's just been unfortunate with opportunities. And obviously, with Danny Wyatt moving to Surrey, that's opened up a consistent opportunity for her, which I think has just made her game go to new levels. She's very consistent. She's very composed. She's got a pretty simple technique. She chooses good options at the right time. She's got all the options. She scores all the funky stuff behind square, but she can hit down the ground as well. And it's just the tempo as well. In terms of, when we played them last time, she went off like a train. I think it was like 30 off 15 balls. Yesterday, she wasn't. She sort of ran a ballish for the first part of her innings, and then, then opened up after that and sort of scored more quickly after the power play, actually. I really I think she's a great youngster. She seems very level, very, seems like she's got good character. I know she's worked exceptionally hard when Lottie was there, and ever since, she's always been somebody that's willing to do the work, which is always a good thing. But yeah, I think she's just an unearthed treasure that we should have seen 3 years ago, but opportunity just didn't allow for that. And now we're seeing really how good she is. Just from, I don't think you can underestimate the power and the, knowing that you've got a spot and you're going to get a consistent run at it, rather than being that player that's in and out when England players come back. I think it's a really difficult place to be, because you sort of think, well, I've got 2 games and I better do it, because I know that I'm going to be not playing when Danny Wyatt comes back, rather than now knowing, look, you're going to get 30 odd games here.
She's the leading run scorer by some distance in the Blast, and the most amazing stat for me is that she's averaging nearly 10 fours per innings, which is just mad. 10 fours per innings. Interestingly, she's not actually hit a 6 yet, but is striking at more than 150, averaging more than 80. Yeah, only her and Danny White-Hodge have more than 225 runs from the first 5 games, and McCacken's got 325. So she's an amazing start.
No, she's good. I just think, leading on from that really quickly, I'd love to. This is again like the other part of it, isn't it? It's like she's at the world. I think she's at the world fire in the 100. I think she's got to retain there. It's like, okay, this girl is absolutely on fire at the minute. How does she get in that 100 team? Where, you look at her like a youngster that's gunning it as well as this, that's opening the batting. So yeah, I think they'll have a few headaches because, you know, she's someone that you've got to get in, but that's a pretty stacked sort of top 4 or 5 at Welsh Fire. But I feel like she's one of those players where you got to strike while the iron's hot. Like, you got to get her in. You got to get her in a position where she's sort of done the most damage. But yeah, really exciting for her. It was a proper knock yesterday. And I think the thing is as well is because she doesn't, like, she's not a 6 hitter, but her strike rate's like literally never dropped under 150. And you think, how? But she just scores. We were looking at the game, actually reviewing the game afterwards, and she just scores frequently off most balls. You know, like dots aren't like ones. Reducing dots and scoring ones aren't the sexy bit that's not the bit that people want to talk about. But I think that is a huge part of her game as well. Is she literally barely ever gets a string of dots.
Cool. Well, she's been one of the stories of the season so far, so interesting to see how she fares for the rest of the summer. Cheers, Lauren. That's everything for today. Catch you next week.
Thanks, mate.